This is the first pumpkin I ever carved, but then over the next decade of pushing myself to improve, I discovered just one thing which has allowed me to take my pumpkin carving to the next level and become a professional pumpkin carver. And today I'm sharing the main thing I focus on when I'm trying to improve. But first I wanted to cover the basics and set the foundations for some of the more advanced stuff I'll be covering between now and Halloween. Outside of pumpkin season, I like to practice on foam pumpkins, and that's what I'll be carving today. But once real pumpkins are available, sort of mid to late September, I'll switch to those. So make sure you subscribe if you want to see how I practice and push myself on every pumpkin I carve. First, we need to understand that there are 3 types of pumpkin carving. When most people think of pumpkin carving, this is what they imagine. Cutting blocks out to make a simple face. This first method is called cutout. The second is sculpting, much the same way you would carve wood or stone. But today we're going to be pumpkin shading, which involves shaving the pumpkin to different depths, letting light through and creating the design. This style of carving relies on having a light inside the pumpkin and really comes to life in the dark. First, you'll need to pick a design. Now for what I'm practicing today, cartoon characters are a great place to start. They're basically a ready-made stencil. They have much simpler shapes and don't tend to have loads of complicated light sources, making it much easier to carve. I've decided to carve this Rick and Morty design, so I've printed it out in the size I want. But you can use any image you like for this. For what I'm looking at today, I'd advise starting with the simple images. As I said, a cartoon character is great. If you did want to jump in and tackle something a bit more complex, you can visit my website and download one of my stencils, which are designed to make it easier to carve more complicated designs. Once you've printed the design in the size you want, you need to get the design onto the pumpkin. On foam pumpkins, I simply stick the design on. You could use tape, spray mounts, washable PVA, as long as the paper is fairly secure but can still be easily removed. Just use whatever you like. If you're carving a real pumpkin, you should check out this video after this one, which shows 3 different ways to get your design onto a real pumpkin. Now, I use different tools on real and foam pumpkins, but the main principle we're going to be looking at today is the same regardless of what you're carving. For foam pumpkins, I like to use a nail drill. This specific one is a Scarlet Nail Drill by Melodie Sussie, and I've got loads of different bits and burrs for this, but you can use any rotary tool on foam pumpkins. A popular option is a Dremel. I just found those a little too powerful and I prefer using a nail drill, but it's really just down to personal preference. Now, I always carve with the light already inside my pumpkin, so I'm just going to cut a hole in the bottom and put an LED light inside it. This is going to make it much easier to see what you're doing. Once the paper's stuck on, I'm going to carve through the paper between the black line and remove a section at a time and grind the outer layer of the pumpkin. But it's important not to go too deep to begin with. Once I have the sections removed, I want to make some areas slightly brighter, the eyes and jacket for example, so I'll just go slightly deeper on those parts. Now this is where I see most carvers stop, and I think that's okay. I think it looks good like this, but this is where you can take your carving to the next level, and this is the main lesson of today's video. You need to stop thinking of what you've carved as a 2D flat image and imagine it as a 3D object, and more importantly, add a light source. You need to imagine every part of the design is broken down into basic shapes, spheres, cylinders, cubes and so on. We then need to give these simple shapes form by adding a light source and carving highlights, midtones and shade. I'm going to imagine the light source for this one is in what's known as the Rembrandt position, so called as it's the lighting position Rembrandt used for nearly all of his portraits. The light source is positioned slightly above the subject, pointing down and roughly 45 degrees to the side. This puts half the face in light, and you'll see what's referred to as a Rembrandt triangle on the opposite cheek to the light source. You'll get great definition of the contours of the face and a good contrast between light and dark areas, making it perfect for pumpkin carving. This is a very popular lighting setup in TV, film, photography and YouTube for that matter. It's everywhere. I'm using the Rembrandt lighting setup right now for my key lights, so it's worthwhile focusing on this lighting setup to begin with, as I guarantee you'll come across it a lot when carving faces. So for this Rick and Morty one, I'm going to imagine the light is coming in from the right hand side in this position. So I'll carve deeper into the pumpkin to brighten up one side of their faces, the right side of their nose, any edges of the arms, shoulders, fingers, that would be in direct line of sight to where that imaginary light source would be. Then I'm simply going to blend towards the areas that I want in the dark. This will create the midtones. I'll add a highlight in the Rembrandt triangle area, and for this one I'm also going to add a secondary light source or some reflected lights on some of the darker areas, which is something I'll go into a bit more detail on in the next video. This will give the carving depth and contrast. Here's a side by side of the carve before and after I've added a light source. If I'm honest, I like them both. After all, the before is a more accurate representation of the starting image. But by practicing adding light sources to basic designs and shapes, you'll start to develop a deeper understanding of how light behaves, and I guarantee you'll start to see an improvement when you carve more complicated designs. Now in this video I'm going to be looking at how to break down more complex designs for carving, and I'll give you a deeper understanding of multiple light sources and how light interacts with objects. And in this one I'm carving this Rick and Morty pumpkin in real time. So if you want to try this one and carve along with me, then check that out. I hope you found this video useful. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.